Hello and good afternoon, everyone. All right, so today we have a class on a holiday that's coming up that we all know about, but how many of us really know exactly how it got started, why it was started, and why it's important? And there are many reasons why it's important, for sure, but we should go over why. So we're going to go over what we should know about MLK Day. And it's a day of service and the history behind it and how in different ways that you can celebrate it. And then we're also going to kind of go over the importance of it and why it's still so relevant today. So let's get started. So here's a quote from Martin Luther King. Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. And that's what we do when we go do Meals on Wheels, when we volunteer for anything that we do, when we go out and serve the community. That is what we're doing, and that is part of the reason why this, it's kind of a recognition. It's a holiday, it's a federal holiday, but it's a recognition of someone that really also stood for what they believed and actually showed up and did exactly what they said. So this is why it's important. So who was Dr. King? So as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is best known for his leadership during the Civil Rights Movement, the American Civil Rights Movement of the 50s and 60s. So it was a wave of activism contesting racial segregation, discrimination, disenfranchisement, and injustice. From 1955 to 1968, Dr. King led several efforts to eliminate Jim Crow laws and other forms of systemic racism that hindered the mobility of people of color in the United States. With sit-ins to marches, Dr. King championed demonstrations that combined nonviolence with direct action. So part of that is, there were a lot of marches on Selma, just going to different places around the country where Jim Crow legislation still was king. And Jim Crow basically said that, well, separate but equal is kind of what it is, but it wasn't really separate. It was separate, but it wasn't equal. And for the longest time, it also had that a lot of, African Americans or black people in the country during the time were considered 3/4 of a human being, not even a full human being, by law. And this is something that, with direct action, by doing marches, sit-ins, boycotting buses and all sorts of things, that direct action really kind of brought to the forefront why we need to fight for each other and fight for rights for every single person on the planet. But we have to start here as well, right here in our own backyard in the United States of America, which is what Dr. King did. And I will challenge this one. Dr. Martin, his I Have a Dream speech is a wonderful speech. It's beautiful. But I would challenge all of you to read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, which I think is even more eloquent than his I Have a Dream speech. But it kind of set it really kind of set it sent a message, but it set up a perfect embodiment of what we should all be dreaming about. What is it that we all want? So his I Have a Dream speech from the 1963 March on Washington is one of his most celebrated. In it, Dr. King envisioned the world with equal justice for all people under the law. He went on to earn the Nobel Peace Prize Award and see the passing of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And towards the end of his life, Dr. King's advocacy emphasized the importance of economic justice in the fight for equality and racial liberation. He was unfortunately assassinated on April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, where he was supporting Memphis sanitation workers in their strike for union recognition, better safety standards, and livable wages. So how did Martin Luther King Day become a holiday? So today, Dr. King's contributions are pretty much undeniable. We're taught about Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement in school, and celebrating his legacy on MLK Day feels only natural, but that wasn't always the case. The creation of Martin Luther King Day was a hard-fought battle between Dr. King supporters and those who felt threatened by his advocacy. Calls for the holiday began shortly after Dr. King's assassination in 1968, but it wasn't until 1983 that Congress, which I was 6 years old, and I guess I never really knew that there was a fight going on during that time. So it wasn't until 1983 that Congress passed legislation making Dr. King's birthday a federal holiday. This was thanks in large part to the work of Coretta Scott King and the King Center and Representative John Coyers and the Congressional Black Caucus. Then came the battle for MLK Day to be recognized at the state level, which included a standoff between the NFL and the state of Arizona over their refusal to adopt the holiday. I didn't know about the NFL, I knew about Arizona. Southern states showed the most resistance, and some even tried combining MLK Day with celebrations for Confederate leaders. In the year 2000, all 50 states officially adopted MLK Day 32 years after it was first proposed. So again, to me, it just shows how important it is. Just like I think that Juneteenth needs to become a holiday so that people don't fear what they don't understand as much anymore. And why does it matter? Why does this holiday matter? So MLK Day matters because it recognizes Dr. King's legacy of service while inspiring us to serve in our own ways, in whatever way that feels best to you. A lot of things that Dr. King advocated for his lifetime was racial justice, economic equality, affordable housing, labor rights, etc. are issues we're still trying to figure out today. So these are still things that haven't been solved, and it's something that we need to stay a part of and stay up on. The protests of the past summer, for example, followed in the footsteps of the Civil Rights Movement and leaders like Dr. King. The fight for justice is ongoing, and we can use this day to reflect on the work that Dr. King started and take responsibility for the work that we still have left to do. The National Constitution Center sums it up pretty well with the following quote: "Today, the King holiday serves multiple purposes. It honors the total legacy of Dr. King, focuses on the issue of civil rights, and highlights the use of nonviolence to promote change, and calls people into public service." So what are some different ways that you can celebrate Martin Luther King Day? So MLK Day is the only federal holiday designated as a national day of service, and Americans are encouraged to spend this day volunteering to improve their communities. So here's some ways that you can participate. Number one, learn about and discuss Dr. King's life and teachings. Again, I would suggest the letter from a Birmingham jail. Number two, join the All-State AFCA Good Works team and complete a volunteer action through Do Something Strength Through Service. There's all sorts of different places, that we can. Three, lead your own service project. It could be a youth service thing. It could be something just around your neighborhood, anything that you really feel that you can do as a day of service just to help out your community. I mean, even with helping people take down, say, their holiday lights or anything like that, you can definitely go from there and just build upon that. Number four, educate yourself on systemic barriers to mobility. So really look at, if you want to look at statistics, we can do a class on it, so let me know. My major was sociology in college, and so I can definitely let you know a lot more about what systemic racism looks like and ways that we can combat it. And then number five is combat discrimination in lending or redlining. So there are different things when it comes to voting that's called redlining. How can we help people in our communities out with that? Luckily, we live in California for that, and that California is pretty open-minded. Early voting, mail-in ballots, all of those things count. And so redlining isn't as detrimental here, but there are certain places in California where it is. Bay Area, not so much. Smaller towns around, there's definitely redlining. And maybe we could find a way that we could help. And finally, 6, protect existing civil rights. So there are plenty of different civil rights groups that we can still support and stay a part of to uphold the legacy of Dr. King, but also to do it for ourselves. So there's one more thing I want to go over, so give me 1 second and I'll bring it up. All right, so here's the next thing, is why celebrating MLK Day is important now as it is ever. Now, we've gone over some of this, but I'm going to start from kind of halfway through. So even though Dr. King was assassinated more than half a century ago, the Poor People's Campaign, which made a national call for a moral revival following the insurrection at the Capitol building. So it still exists today. The campaign states the goal of uniting tens of thousands of people across the country to challenge the evils of systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, ecological devastation, and the nation's distorted morality. In keeping with King, the Poor People's Campaign mandate embraces a nonviolent approach to civil rights activism, focusing particularly on arts and culture. And the website for the campaign features poetry, music, and visual art that addresses anti-poverty and anti-racist activism. So although Dr. King's messages are now frequently watered down by many who claim to agree with this message and support his civil rights leadership, there are still many primarily Black activists who are carrying on the fight of Dr. King, so instrumental in advancing. Visible in the ongoing movement for Black lives, including Black Lives Matter, to the Revied Poor People's Campaign, is the importance and continued relevance of King's work of life and are undeniable. So a lot of the time, people will kind of dismiss different campaigns where there are people that are just out trying to basically gain hold of, like, this is still an important issue in the United States. A lot of people will say, oh, racism doesn't really exist anymore, but it really does. There's all sorts of things we can do, recognizing your privilege, recognizing what you can do with the privilege that you have in order to kind of move things forward. Now, I don't think a lot of times I think we kind of lose sight of, once something's kind of done and we just nail it down as a holiday, then we're like, well, we're celebrating this one day a year. But service is something that goes on and should be going on every day of the year. So we need to make sure that we're being responsible and recognizing Martin Luther King's legacy. But the way he would want it done, I almost guarantee, is by people holding up that mantle and saying, we're going to carry it on and continue. And, fighting for what's right, as this article says, there's kind of ethically or morally, there's been kind of a decline when it comes to what is right and what is it that we do that makes what we do right. And figuring that out for ourselves is very, very important. So I think that that's what we should all focus on when it comes to celebrating this day for someone who it's not just for him, but it's for what he fought for. And we need to be able to stand up and do the same thing. And once we can all do that and be happy with ourselves that we've done something, just like we do when we go out and we're giving food to people that need food, and we drive around in the rain and walk around in the rain and get wet. And maybe it's not the funnest thing to do all the time, but think of the service that you're doing for people that get to stay home and stay dry, and you're helping them get food and get their bellies full and make sure that they're happy. So, let's continue to do what we do, and let's do it not just for Dr. King, but for ourselves, and be proud of the work that we do, because you all do very good work, and you're amazing people. Let's continue that line of thought and carry it on in our hearts everywhere that we go. Anyway, I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you coming up on next Wednesday. But ciao for now. Enjoy a long and happy weekend. Ciao, everybody.